Australia is a massive continent, but it's also a pretty small place in terms of population. But few people really understand the absolute scale of how sparsely populated it actually is. This map tells the story of two completely different Australias. Down here, in this boomerang of light, you have the big bustling cities everybody knows: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide. The overwhelming majority of the country's population, around 90%, is packed into this relatively small coastal area. But then there's the other Australia, the top half. This colossal chunk of land stretches from the coast of Western Australia, across the Northern Territory and deep into Queensland. To put that into perspective, this region is bigger than Western Europe, but it's home to only about 1.2 million people. The city of Sydney alone has more than 5 times that many people. Darwin, the biggest city in the entire northern half, has a population of around 150,000 people, which by global standards is basically a small town. So why is this enormous resource-rich part of a first world country so empty? Well, the easy answer you might be thinking is the desert. Duh. And while there's some truth to that, I'm here to argue that that's only a small part of the overall puzzle. The full explanation is way more complicated, and it comes down to 3 huge forces that have shaped this continent. The first, and maybe the biggest reason for the North's emptiness, is the land itself. For most of the year, the climate up here is actively hostile to the kind of cities we see in the south. It's a place of wild, violent swings. See, it doesn't really have 4 seasons. It has 2, the wet and the dry, and both of them are brutal. The wet season, from about November to April, isn't just a bit of rain. It's a full-on monsoon. The humidity is off the charts, and then the sky just opens up with these insane downpours that can last for days. Dusty plains turn into massive floodlands. Rivers that were nothing but dry sand a month before become raging torrents that wash away roads and cut off whole towns for weeks. On top of that, it's cyclone season. Huge storms barrel in from the sea every year, threatening to flatten anything built on the coast. You don't just build stuff here, you have to constantly rebuild it. Then, almost overnight, it all stops. The dry season kicks in. For months, you get these piercing blue skies with no clouds, and the heat just bakes everything. The land dries out and turns into a tinderbox, leading to these enormous bushfires that can scorch hundreds of square kilometres. This 1-2 punch of a climate makes life, and especially farming, almost impossible. You'd think all that water from the wet would be great for agriculture, but it's a trap. Most of the rain falls so hard and fast that it just runs right off into the ocean before it can be caught or soak into the ground. And the ground itself is another huge problem. Much of the soil in northern Australia is some of the oldest on the planet. It's been weathered and eroded for over 250 million years, which means most of the nutrients have been washed away. For comparison, the good soil in Europe and North America has only been around for about 10,000 years, so the soil in northern Australia just sucks for farming. It's thin, rocky and low in all the good stuff crops need to grow. This brutal mix of weather, water and bad soil has been the graveyard for a lot of big dreams. The most famous failure was the Ord River irrigation scheme back in the 60s. The government poured a ton of money into building this massive dam to create Lake Argyle, a lake that holds 18 times more water than Sydney Harbour. The idea was to create a new agricultural heartland. But it was a disaster. The costs were insane. Pests loved the tropical environment and the soil was just too poor. Crop after crop failed. The scheme is still around today, but it's a tiny fraction of the original dream. And it's a huge reminder that you can't just force the northern environment to do what you want. But to say the top half of Australia is empty is to look at it through the wrong lens, because it ignores a human history that goes back more than 65,000 years. The land isn't empty, it's just not inhabited with skyscrapers and suburbs, and a huge chunk of it is legally owned by the people who actually know how to live there. Long before Europeans showed up, Aboriginal Australians had spread across the entire continent. They developed this incredibly smart, mobile way of life that was perfectly synced to the land's rhythms. They knew how to survive the dry and thrive in the wet. They proved the north isn't uninhabitable. It's just not suited for the kind of dense, static cities you see in the south. And the thing is, this has a very real, modern, legal power. The word empty is just wrong, because vast parts of Northern Australia are privately owned. In the Northern Territory, it's especially crazy. About 48% of the entire territory's land, and something like 8% of its massive coastline, is Aboriginal land. Across the whole of Northern Australia, Indigenous rights and interests cover an estimated 78% of the landmass. This isn't just government land waiting for a developer. It's private land, owned by communities whose connection to it goes back thousands of years. The decisions about what happens here aren't made in a boardroom in Sydney. They're made by the traditional owners. And for a lot of these communities, the goal isn't building a new city. It's caring for country. That means managing the land sustainably, protecting sacred sites, and basically being a long-term custodian, not a short-term developer. So when you see that dark area on the map, you're not looking at an absence. You're looking at a different kind of presence. It's a sign of the success of the Indigenous land rights movement in securing control of their ancestral homes, and their choice to manage it in a way that doesn't involve paving it over. The final piece of this puzzle goes back to a few key decisions made centuries ago that basically locked Australia's population into the south. It really starts in 1788 when the British First Fleet arrived. Captain Arthur Phillip chose Port Jackson, now Sydney Harbour, for a pretty simple reason. It was a great natural harbour and the climate was temperate, much more like what the Europeans were used to. That single choice became the anchor for the entire continent. Settlements spread out from Sydney along the path of least resistance, south and west along the coast where the climate was mild. Early tries at settling the north were total failures. Places like Port Essington were wiped out by the harsh climate, tropical diseases, and just being so incredibly isolated. The message was clear. The north was too hard. The future of Australia was going to be built in the south. This created a kind of gravity. All the infrastructure, all the money, and all the people went south. The north was just seen as a remote backwater. Today, that's backed up by modern economics. You hear about the tyranny of distance in Australia, and you feel it most in the north. Darwin is actually closer to the capital of Indonesia than it is to Sydney. The cost to build a road or a power line is astronomically higher in the north than in a suburb of Melbourne. Everything from food to building supplies has to be trucked over these huge distances, which makes the cost of living way higher. This creates a cycle that's hard to break. Because there are so few people, there's no big market to attract major private investment. And with no investment, there are no jobs to pull people in. The big industries that do exist, like mining and cattle ranching, don't actually support big populations. A modern mine might only employ a few hundred people, and a massive cattle station, some of which are the size of a small country like Israel, might only be run by a handful of staff. The result is that a lot of skilled workers are fly-in, fly-out. They work in the north for a few weeks, then fly back home to their families in the south. This constant churn makes it tough to build a real, stable community with the kind of services people expect. The social and economic pull of the southern cities is just too strong. So why is Australia's top half so empty? It's not just one thing. It's the combined weight of three massive forces. First, you have a brutal environment, a land of extreme weather and ancient, terrible soil that is defeated over a century of attempts to tame it. Second, the land isn't really empty at all. It's the home of the world's oldest cultures, and a huge part of it is legally owned and managed by Indigenous Australians who have a different vision for the land that prioritises preservation over pavement. And finally, a series of historical accidents and economic realities created a powerful gravitational pull to the south that's almost impossible to reverse today. The sheer cost and distance have sealed the deal. That vast dark area on the map of Australia isn't really a sign of failure. It's the signature of the continent itself. It represents the power of nature, the resilience of an ancient culture, and the echoes of history. Australia's top half isn't empty. It's just full of other things besides people. If you found this deep dive into Australia's crazy geography and history interesting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that explain our world. And check out our other video on the screen now for another journey into the world's most interesting places. Thanks for watching.